In the decades after World War II, some of America's most trusted journalists were secretly on the CIA's payroll. The news you read, the opinions you trusted, the world as it appeared in newspapers and on television, parts of it were carefully shaped by a covert operation buried deep inside the U.S. intelligence apparatus. How many stories were planted? How many reporters played along? And when the public finally learned the truth, why did so few people seem to care? Operation Mockingbird was an alleged CIA program that began in the early 1950s, designed to influence domestic and foreign media outlets by recruiting journalists, editors, and media executives as intelligence assets. Church Committee, 1976. The operation emerged during the height of the Cold War, when the United States government believed controlling the narrative was as critical as controlling weapons. At its core, the program sought to plant pro-American stories, suppress unwanted information, and monitor foreign press operations through a network of complicit media professionals. Why it matters now is simple. The blueprint established then, embedding intelligence operatives within trusted institutions, remains a reference point for understanding modern concerns about propaganda, media independence, and government overreach. The legacy of Mockingbird shaped decades of journalism ethics debates and continues to fuel public skepticism toward mainstream media. The roots of Operation Mockingbird trace back to 1948, when the CIA's Office of Special Projects was formed under Frank Wisner, a senior intelligence officer. Carl Bernstein, Rolling Stone, 1977. Wisner quickly recognized that media influence was a low-cost, high-impact tool for shaping public opinion during the early Cold War. By 1950, the CIA had reportedly begun recruiting American journalists who traveled abroad, using them to gather intelligence and distribute agency-approved narratives in foreign outlets. The program expanded rapidly throughout the 1950s, according to journalist Carl Bernstein's 1977 investigation. More than 400 American journalists had secretly carried out assignments for the CIA over the previous 25 years. Rolling Stone, 1977. These relationships ranged from casual information sharing to direct employment. Some journalists wrote articles at the CIA's request. Others allowed agency operatives to pose as reporters. Major American news organizations, including the New York Times, CBS, and Time Inc., Sinan Tudi Kiuhan, were allegedly involved in varying degrees. Philip Graham, publisher of The Washington Post, was reportedly one of the CIA's most valuable media assets during this period. Deborah Davis, Catherine the Great, 1979. Graham is said to have assisted in recruiting other journalists and facilitated CIA access to the Post's foreign correspondence. His sudden death in 1963 left many questions unanswered about the full extent of his collaboration. The operation functioned quietly until the 1970s, when a series of investigations began peeling back the secrecy. In 1973, Watergate and the broader climate of distrust in government institutions created an opening for scrutiny. Investigative journalist Seymour Hersh exposed widespread CIA domestic spying activities in a series of New York Times articles in 1974. The New York Times, December 1974. This prompted Congress to launch formal inquiries. The Church Committee, led by Senator Frank Church, conducted a sweeping investigation into U.S. intelligence abuses between 1975 and 1976. The committee's final report confirmed that the CIA had indeed maintained covert relationships with journalists and media organizations. Though the agency refused to name most individuals involved, Church Committee Final Report, Book 1, 1976. The report revealed that the CIA had also funded the creation of media outlets abroad and used them as fronts for intelligence operations. Following the revelations, CIA Director William Colby issued internal restrictions on the use of journalists in 1976. His successor, George H.W. Bush, publicly pledged to end the practice of recruiting accredited American journalists. Yet critics noted that these reforms contained loopholes, including exceptions for freelancers and foreign correspondents. The most comprehensive documentation of Operation Mockingbird comes from the Church Committee, hearings, and Carl Bernstein's investigative reporting. Bernstein's 25,000-word article in Rolling Stone, titled "The CIA and the Media," remains the most detailed journalistic account. Rolling Stone, October 1977. He reported that the CIA's media operations were overseen by the Directorate of Plans and that the relationships were often arranged through intermediaries to maintain plausibility of deniability. The Church Committee confirmed that the CIA had relationships with several dozen American news organizations and hundreds of individual journalists. Church Committee, 1976. However, the committee did not publicly identify most of the journalists or outlets involved, citing privacy concerns and potential harm to the individuals' reputations. This selective disclosure has fueled ongoing debate about the true scale of the operation. Declassified CIA documents released in later years have provided additional context. A 1977 internal CIA report acknowledged that the agency had used journalists for intelligence gathering and propaganda purposes, but argued these activities were essential for national security during the Cold War. CIA Historical Review Program, Declassified 2007. The agency maintained that most journalists involved knew they were assisting intelligence operations and did so voluntarily. Some named individuals have acknowledged their cooperation. Joseph Alsop, a prominent syndicated columnist, admitted after the revelations that he had worked closely with the CIA and saw no ethical conflict. Multiple sources, 1977-1978. Others, including journalists at CBS and the New York Times, either denied involvement or declined to comment when confronted with allegations. Supporters of the program, primarily former intelligence officials, have argued that Operation Mockingbird was a necessary tool during an existential struggle against Soviet influence. They contend that the journalists who participated did so willingly, understood the stakes, and were motivated by patriotism rather than corruption. Victor Marchetti, The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, 1974. From this perspective, the operation was no different from any other wartime information campaign. Critics, including journalism ethics advocates, maintain that the program fundamentally violated the independence and credibility of the press. They argue that even voluntary cooperation with intelligence agencies creates conflicts of interest that undermine public trust. Committee to Protect Journalists' various statements. The fact that most relationships remained secret meant audiences could not evaluate the potential bias in what they were reading. A significant gap remains in the historical record. The CIA has never released a complete list of journalists or organizations involved. The agency has cited privacy protections and ongoing intelligence concerns as justification. This secrecy has allowed conspiracy theories to flourish, with some claiming the program never truly ended and continues in modified forms today. No credible evidence supports these claims, but the lack of transparency makes them difficult to definitively disprove. There is also debate about whether the program extended beyond the Cold War era. Some researchers point to later controversies, such as the Pentagon's military analyst program during the Iraq War, as evidence that government manipulation of media continued, the New York Times, 2008. However, these later programs operated under different structures and legal frameworks, making direct comparisons complicated. For the journalists who participated knowingly, the revelations brought professional disgrace and forced difficult reckonings with their own choices. Some defended their actions as patriotic service. Others retreated from public life, their reputations damaged beyond repair. The journalists who were unaware that colleagues were working for the CIA faced a different burden, discovering that their newsrooms had been compromised without their knowledge or consent. The broader impact fell on the American public. Millions of readers and viewers had consumed news shaped, in part, by hidden intelligence agendas, stories that never ran, perspectives that were amplified or suppressed, a version of the world filtered through national security priorities. The discovery of Operation Mockingbird deepened the post-Watergate crisis of trust in institutions, contributing to a cynicism about media that persists decades later. Foreign journalists and outlets faced even harsher consequences. In some countries, governments used the Mockingbird revelations to justify crackdowns on independent media, claiming local journalists were likely CIA assets. Real reporters working in dangerous environments found their credibility questioned and their safety compromised. The operation's exposure made genuine journalism harder in precisely the places where it was most needed. Think of journalism as society's immune system, detecting threats and spreading information so the body politic can respond appropriately. Operation Mockingbird was like an autoimmune disorder, where the system began attacking its own credibility from within. When the public cannot distinguish between independent reporting and state-sponsored messaging, the immune system stops functioning. The operation also illustrates a fundamental tension in democratic societies: how to balance national security needs with the public's right to unfiltered information. Intelligence agencies argue they must sometimes operate in darkness to protect the nation. But when that darkness extends into the institutions meant to hold power accountable, the balance tips toward authoritarianism, even if the intentions are defensive. From a historical perspective, Mockingbird represents a turning point in how governments approached information warfare. Before the operation, propaganda was mostly external, aimed at foreign audiences. Mockingbird blurred that line, bringing intelligence tactics home. It set precedents that later appeared in different forms: government video news releases, paid commentary by retired officials, and the revolving door between media and political operatives. The tools changed, but the underlying question remained the same. Who controls the narrative? And who gets to know about it? Here is what we know with confidence. The CIA did recruit journalists and influence media coverage during the Cold War. Hundreds of individuals participated in various capacities. Congressional investigations confirmed the basic facts, and some participants acknowledged their roles. Here is what remains unclear: the full extent of the operation, the complete list of participants, and whether similar practices continue in modified forms today. The official story says Mockingbird ended with reforms in the late 1970s, but the secrecy that enabled it in the first place makes verification difficult. What happened next would determine whether those reforms meant anything at all. In the near term, Operation Mockingbird will likely remain a historical reference point rather than an active scandal. The principles are mostly deceased, and the Cold War context that justified the program has dissolved. However, 3 scenarios bear watching. Scenario 1. Further declassification. Medium confidence. As more time passes, additional CIA documents may be released that provide fuller accounting of the operation's scope and participants. This would likely generate renewed interest, but limited practical consequences given the passage of time. Scenario 2. Modern parallels, high confidence. Concerns about government influence over media will continue to surface in different contexts, particularly involving social media platforms, foreign disinformation campaigns, and the relationship between tech companies and intelligence agencies. Mockingbird will be invoked as a historical precedent in these debates. Scenario 3. Persistent secrecy, high confidence. The CIA and other intelligence agencies will likely maintain that full transparency about past media operations would compromise current methods and sources, ensuring that complete disclosure never occurs. This will sustain conspiracy theories and public skepticism about official narratives. The pattern is clear. Each generation rediscovers the tension between security and transparency, often learning that previous generations faced identical dilemmas without fully resolving them. Operation Mockingbird revealed something uncomfortable but essential. The line between informing the public and manipulating it has always been thinner than we like to believe. The operation is over, but the questions it raised about trust, independence, and the role of media in democracy have never been more relevant. If this story interested you, watch our next documentary on COINTELPRO, the FBI's parallel program to infiltrate and disrupt domestic political groups during the same era. Understanding how intelligence agencies operated then helps us recognize the patterns when they emerge again. Source notes and disclaimer. This script draws primarily from the Church Committee Final Report, 1976, Carl Bernstein's Rolling Stone Investigation, 1977, declassified CIA documents, and contemporary reporting from the New York Times and the Washington Post. Some details about specific individuals remain disputed or unverified. The program's full scope may never be completely known due to ongoing classification. This documentary presents confirmed facts alongside clearly labeled allegations where evidence is incomplete. As with all historical intelligence operations, new information may emerge that changes our understanding.